Generally, just three hollowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be, serving as your rallying points to build courage when courage seems to fail, to regain faith when there seems to be little cause for faith, to create hope when hope becomes forlorn. However, even if, as courts profess, the general standard or duty is the duty of reasonable care, that is, the duty to avoid negligent conduct, and this general duty is owed to those within reach of a defendant's conduct, and moreover, even if each person has the general duty to exercise reasonable care for the safety of others, nonetheless, the existence of a duty of care is a question of law, not a matter to be decided on the merits by a trier of fact, or in a question to be submitted to a jury composed of selected and summoned peers, but rather placed within the sole discretion of a jurist presiding over a court of competent jurisdiction. Hello, my name is Major Mike Webb. Quite distinguishable from a fact, a matter of fact, in the hollow chambers of a courtroom in which a finding is said to be clearly erroneous when, although there is evidence to support it, the reviewing court on the entire evidence is left with the definite and firm conviction that a mistake has been committed. For a reviewing court will not disturb factual determinations unless they are plainly wrong or without evidence to support them. Reviewing courts of right or indiscretion will not disturb decisions of a trial judge on pure questions of law unless the trial court has committed a clear abuse of discretion. And a trial court is said to have abused its discretion when it reaches a decision so arbitrary and unreasonable as to amount to a clear and prejudicial error of law. Foobar. Fornicated up beyond all recognition. Under this standard of review, a court will find it at least proper to reconsider a decision rendered where it may have applied the wrong standard, and by definition, when an action is arbitrary and unreasonable, it constitutes an abuse of discretion. That is just the law. That's it. The power and duty of a court to make the proper correction of a mistake of fact is not denied, for in regard to mistakes, simple mistakes, there is no doubt that courts of equity have jurisdiction to correct them when they are apparent upon the face. We all make mistakes, or may be made out by due construction of its terms, for the intention will prevail over the words, such that if there is just a mistake in the name or the description or even the number intended to take part or even in the property intended, equity will correct it. Just the facts. However, in the law pertaining to mistake, acts of even simple negligence will find that good motives and belief in truth do not negate an inference of malice, but are relevant only in mitigation of punitive damages if the jury chooses to accord them weight. At the mercy of the jury. Bad faith is not just intentional conduct if the jury chooses to accord them weight. Bad faith is not just intentional misconduct, but intent to engage in conduct for an impermissible reason, willful noncompliance, or willful ignorance of the facts, closing your eyes, putting your head in a hole like an ostrich. And the traditional rule dictates that ignorance of the law is no excuse. You cannot tell the policeman that you did not know that the speed limit was 55. You did not know that there was a stop sign that you passed. Knowledge that the conduct is unlawful is all that is required. Stop means stop. We hold these truths to be self-evident. because no power can be exerted unless it can be found in some express delegation of power, or in some power to properly be implied therefrom. And as a general rule, at least in the administrative law, agencies are bound to follow their own rules, even self-imposed procedural rules that limit or otherwise discretionary decisions. And even the Army must abide by its own regulation, even if it is more rigorous than necessary. Yet, according to even a recent article published in the pages of the Washington Examiner, the origins of SARS-CoV-2 are still hotly contested, almost exactly 5 years after the start of the pandemic that took the lives of 1.2 million Americans and 7 million people worldwide, exceeding Hitler in the Holocaust in half the time. According to scientists like Christian G. Anderson, lead author of the most cited scientific work on the proximal origins of this novel virus, failure to comprehensively investigate the zoonotic origin through collaborative and carefully coordinated studies would leave the world vulnerable to future pandemics arising from the very same human activities that have repeatedly put us on a collision course with novel viruses. And we hear that there may be another pandemic coming in the near future. Indeed, as the WHO director has stated at the very end of December 2021, surely we have learned by now that we underestimate this virus at our own peril. However, according to the most trusted voice in separating fact from fiction, the esteemed Dr. Anthony Fauci, now considering a preemptive pardon, the pandemic's true origin may never be uncovered. In late May 2021, however, according to the President, the Commander-in-Chief of all military forces, the U.S. intelligence community, of which I am a part in retirement, had coalesced around two likely scenarios, but had not reached a definitive conclusion on this question. The intelligence community, of which I am a part, albeit in retirement, is an entity created under law and under Executive Order 12333. In case you thought it was for everybody, the agencies within the intelligence community shall, in accordance with applicable law, conduct intelligence activities necessary for the conduct of foreign relations. If you're not in foreign relations, we don't touch your stuff. And the protection of national security. You're not running around in the military forces, Title 10, Title 50, military forces. This has nothing to do with you. To include hostile activities directed against the United States by foreign powers, organizations, persons, and their agents, not emerging viruses by themselves. Accordingly, collection of such information is priority objective and will be pursued in a vigorous, innovative, and responsible manner that is consistent with the Constitution and applicable law, like Executive Order 12333, and respectful of the principles upon which the United States was founded. We the people. Hence, any information related to the origins of COVID-19 that you may have heard or thought about when the President made his speech in May of 2021, when lawfully collected by the intelligence community, would be strictly limited to, for instance, information that is publicly available or collected within the consent of the person concerned. Yes, they have to read you your Miranda rights and all that stuff and have a formal opportunity for you to sit there and say you want to lawyer up. United States intelligence activities. That's how that is. And information needed to protect the safety of any persons or organizations, including those who are targets, victims, or hostages of international terrorist organizations, they can be collecting, suggesting something quite distinct from simply an infectious disease, conforming to the popularly accepted narrative by people who watch spy movies, maybe, that we were hit with a virus that was met with silence and spread unchecked, denials for days, weeks, and months that led to more deaths, more infections, more stress, and more loneliness. And at least according to Avril Haines, the Director of National Intelligence and Their final report, based on our investigations involving a variety of public and non-public information, we conclude that there are indications that SARS-CoV-2 may have been tied to China's biological weapons research program. That's what the DNI said back in June 2023. I don't know what the Washington Examiner was reading and had spilled over to the human population by whatever means during a lab-related incident. We're not saying it escaped, we just said it was lab-related at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, while admitting that the IC has failed to adequately address this information. However, the committee has not seen any indications, and the wording is important here, that the Chinese military had intentionally released SARS-CoV-2. That the Chinese military had intentionally released SARS-CoV-2. This should be common sense, and General Lloyd Austin has said you're not going to win a war if what? You don't have the right information. Amazing, you sit there and you touch that stove 1,000,000 times because you think that you're not going to burn yourself. And then, holy cow, you find out that you burn yourself. You decide you're going to do it again, you do that at your own risk. And rosing up at your intelligence, telling people you went to Harvard when you didn't, doesn't help us to be successful in this fight. And hence, in the tactical environment, intelligence preparation on the battlefield, IPB, something I studied at Fort Huachuca, is a systematic, continuous process of analyzing the threat and environment in specific geographic areas. In step 1 of the IPB process, the G2S2, a leader identifies characteristics of the battlefield which will influence friendly and threat operations, as well as identifying gaps in the intelligence holdings. And I don't know if you've read the newspapers, but even Jamie Metzel, a former member of the National Security Council, fellow member of the intelligence community, has said, defining the problem years after the start of the global pandemic, there has yet to be a comprehensive forensic investigation into its origins. And even still, we don't have that. In May 2020, even one former deputy director of the Central Intelligence Agency, Michael Morrell, had expressed a reasonable belief or had safely assumed that COVID-19 will be with us for some time, perhaps 18 to 24 months, which had been the current opinion of many medical experts. However, today, that is clearly not the case. Somehow we exceeded 2 years, the longest respiratory tract infection pandemic in history. On a per capita basis, we've done worse as a nation than virtually all other countries, such that there's no reason that a rich country like ours has to have 1.2 million deaths. Over 70% over the age of 65, known population of high risk from the very, very beginning. Even if some still don't know exactly what it was that went wrong, or say they don't. This is wholly unacceptable, and the current president, in what I interpret as a directive to a commissioned military officer who took a solemn oath and as a member of the intelligence community, albeit in retirement, has placed his great personal faith and trust in me, moi, qui tam pro domini regent, on behalf of our Lord the King, to remain an active participant, this is a quote, in helping to write the next chapter of American story, while requesting my personal courage and dedication at this critical time. That's the letter I got. I don't know about the one you did. No power can be exerted unless it be found in some express delegation of power or in some power to be properly implied therefrom. Hence, as always, we must begin with the words of the statute, creating the commission and delineating its powers. Statutes cannot be read intelligently if the eye is closed to considerations evidenced in affiliated statutes or in the known temper of the legislative opinion. That's out of Felix Frankfurter. Further, our courts have recognized that written messages are not communicated unless they are read, and reading requires an affirmative act. That's how you score well on reading comprehension and get into Harvard. While no specific words are necessary to create a condition precedent, words such as if, Little English, provided that when, after, and as soon as are subject to are words recognized as those that traditionally indicate conditions, and by the plain word meaning contained in the authorizing provisions to issue an emergency use authorization or EUA, like we're used to authorize the safe and effective quote-unquote vaccines, the HHS Secretary must declare that circumstances exist, certain conditions precedent, justifying the authorization based on one of only 4 determinations, 2 of which involve a chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear CBRN agent or agents. And this is how on March 27, 2020, if you recall, read, or even care, the problem statement published in the Federal Register, Public Laws, was declared as the emergency in the COVID-19 pandemic. If you don't know what the emergency was, you can go back to the Federal Register and now read it 3 years later, 4 years later, almost 5 years later. That is the law. And the traditional rule dictates that ignorance of the law is what? No excuse. Knowledge that the conduct is unlawful is all that is required. In the beginning of the global public health crisis, while scientists had reported that the mechanism of spread of the current novel coronavirus, or COV2, is not clearly understood, what scientists said, but reiterated that it is thought that spread can occur through droplets containing virus particles when infected persons sneeze, cough, or speak. Even the CDC had noted that the virus is thought to spread mainly from person to person between people who are in close contact with one another within 6 feet through respiratory droplets produced when an infected person coughs, sneezes, or talks. Thought that these droplets can land in the mouths and noses of people who are nearby or possibly be inhaled into the lungs, and thought that COVID-19 may be spread by people who are not showing symptoms. Perhaps you didn't even read the update on May 7, 2021. It provided us some more clarification on how scientists believe this virus was being spread. But perhaps getting back to what was in the law, published in March 2020, when the EUA declaration was issued, perhaps what you and others had thought may differ with what is still an unfamiliar term, perhaps, especially if you're running around doing something, running away from an infectious disease. The term CBRN stands for chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear, and relates to very, very specific types of hazards that may be encountered during an incident. What do we mean by that? A priori, most important of all, the term CBRN is generally reserved for deliberate release of a hazardous material, such as in a terrorist attack, whereas the term hazmat, something you might be more familiar with, is used for accidental release or exposure to toxic industrial material. Those running around getting cleaning supplies because they thought we were going to catch COVID-19, that even the CDC said you had a 1 in 10,000 chance by April of 2021. Even though some people went out and still bought sanitizing supplies, obviously who did not get the memo. And some public school divisions, I believe, were in that category. So if for whatever reason you had been oblivious to this legislative fact, or even these adjudicative facts, and wholly unaware that when the president had said he was placing us on a war footing, you now know that was not just hyperbole. Upon my personal request, not long after the president had tasked the intelligence community, the CDC proposed a regulatory first. I'm not a scientist, but I made the CDC do what I told them to do. The addition of a chimeric virus to the select agents and toxins list in September 2021. Takes a little time, a couple of months, once you make a request. And so September 2021, boom, they did what I said. SARS-CoV-2, SARS-CoV, at that time, had been described as a chimeric virus, resulting from any deliberate manipulation. And now today, thanks to my request, any individual or entity may not conduct or possess products resulting from experiments that involve the creation of SARS-CoV or SARS-CoV-2 chimeric viruses resulting from any deliberate manipulations of SARS-CoV-2 to incorporate nucleic acids, coding them for SARS-CoV virulence factors or vice versa. That is contained in 42 CFR Section 73.13A3. My law. While a public report, the U.S. intelligence community had coalesced around two likely scenarios, but had not reached a definitive conclusion on this question. The working definition of the term chimera is a new hybrid microorganism created by joining nucleic acid fragments from two or more different microorganisms in which each of at least two of the fragments contain essential genes necessary for replication. And for these types of microorganisms, the term chimera will be used in the true name in the place or vector, corroborating in the law published in the Code of Federal Regulations, thanks to guess who, an official acknowledgement of a laboratory origin. This stuff does not happen in nature. So why everybody is so confused? Perhaps they're not reading the law. That's my best guess. And the traditional rule dictates that ignorance of the law is no excuse. Knowledge that the conduct is unlawful is all that is required, strict liability. If you have any other beliefs, theories, hypotheses, notions, or conceptions, that is the law. One of them was mine. And generally, to constitute criminal negligence essential to a conviction, an accused's conduct must be of such recklessness, wanton, or flagrant nature as to indicate a callous disregard for human life and the probable consequences of the act. The most stringent protections of free speech would not protect a man in falsely shouting fire in a theater and causing a panic. So if you're still running around saying you got a highly contagious disease, you need to take a look at the law. And it does not even protect a man from an injunction against uttering words that may have all the effect of force. Whenever inquiry is a duty, and evolutionary pressure of the longest respiratory tract pandemic in history is certainly something that might prompt a duty of due diligence and inquiry. The party bound to make it effective with knowledge of all which he would have discovered had he decided to do his homework and perform that duty. And means of knowledge, if it's out there right there on the internet, that's certainly where I found it. I didn't have to go into any top secret sources, classified sources, with the duty of using them, just read a science book, are in equity the equivalent to knowledge. Hey, guess what? You got that wonderful computer, you got the World Wide Web at your fingertips. Maybe you need to do something other than look at adult material. Mere acquiescence or silence or failure of an officer to perform a duty does not make one a participant in a conspiracy unless he acts or fails to act like deciding to blow up the law with knowledge of the purpose of the conspiracy and with the view of protecting and aiding it. Moreover, for purposes of disavowal, a defendant is presumed to continue his involvement in a conspiracy unless he makes a substantial affirmative showing, affirmative action of withdrawal, abandonment, or defeat of the conspiratorial purpose. Mere cessation, just, ducking out, pretending that you weren't involved, not going to do. Mere cessation of activity in furtherance of the conspiracy is not sufficient to show withdrawal. Once conspiracy has been established, the government need only show slight evidence that a particular person was a member of conspiracy to put you on the gallows. In summation, the term CBRN is generally reserved for the deliberate release of hazardous materials, such as in a terrorist attack. Furthermore, the President had asked the intelligence community and myself under authority of Executive Order 12333 and could only have done so if information was needed to protect the safety of any persons or organizations, including those who are targets, victims, or hostages of international terrorist organizations. unless they have a terrorist organization of coronaviruses. Believe it or not, that is the law. Proceed at your own risk. You have been given reasonable notice. Individuals who act entirely independently of the foreign terrorist organization to advance its goals or objectives shall not be considered to be working under the foreign terrorist organization's direction and control. However, clearly a terrorist is anyone who attempts to further his views by a system of coercive intimidation. And for all intents and purposes, at sentencing, that person is not called a judge, not called a jury, not called a patriot, but rather, quite appropriately, a terrorist. Good motives and belief in the truth do not negate an inference of malice, but are relevant only in mitigation of punitive damages. Maybe they won't hang you if the jury chooses to accord them weight. However, the bottom line is the traditional rule dictates that ignorance, being stupid, of the law is no excuse. Knowledge that the conduct is unlawful is all that is required. Once we tell you you broke the law, guess what? Get a lawyer. This briefing is unclassified. Carry on. This message was approved by Major Mike Webb. Honest. This has been a Filmways presentation, darling. And y'all come back now. Yeah.